The German army of World War II is often remembered for its tanks, the Tiger, the Panther, machines that have become legends. But there was another vehicle, far less glamorous, that carried the so-called elite of the Reich into battle. It wasn't a tank, it wasn't a truck, it was something in between, a half-track. And the soldiers who rode in it had a very specific name for it. They called it the Massengrab. This is the story of the Sd.Kfz 250, a small, fast, lightly armored box on tracks that was supposed to revolutionize mobile warfare. Instead, it became one of the most dangerous vehicles a German soldier could be assigned to. The men inside were not protected, they were exposed. And when the bullets started flying, they died together, crammed into a steel coffin with no way out. The question is, why did the Wehrmacht keep sending its best troops into this death trap? The Sd.Kfz 250 was born from a very specific German obsession, speed. In the 1930s, German military planners were developing a new kind of war. They called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The idea was simple. Tanks would punch through the enemy line, and infantry would follow immediately to hold the ground. But infantry on foot was too slow. Trucks were fast, but they couldn't go off-road. They got stuck in mud and snow. The solution was the half-track, a vehicle with wheels in the front for steering and tracks in the back for traction. It could go almost anywhere a tank could go, and it could keep up with the panzers. The Sd.Kfz 250 was the light version of this concept. It was designed to carry a small squad of soldiers, usually 4 to 6 men, plus a driver and a gunner. It was fast for its time, capable of reaching speeds of nearly 60 kilometers per hour on a good road. It was nimble. It could cross trenches and climb hills. On paper, it was the perfect tool for mobile warfare. In reality, it had a fatal flaw: the armor. The steel plating on the Sd.Kfz 250 was between 8 and 14 millimeters thick. That sounds like protection, but it was barely enough to stop a pistol bullet. A standard infantry rifle could punch through it at medium range. A heavy machine gun, like the Soviet DSHK, would tear through it like paper. And the worst part was the top. There was no roof.
The crew compartment was open to the sky. This meant that any artillery shell exploding nearby would shower the inside with shrapnel. Mortar fragments, grenade splinters, even debris from explosions would rain down on the men inside. They were sitting ducks in a metal box. The German soldiers understood this very quickly. They knew that the moment they came under serious fire, their vehicle offered almost no protection. And because the compartment was so small, there was no room to take cover. The men were packed tightly together, shoulder to shoulder. If one grenade landed inside, it would kill or wound everyone. If the vehicle was hit by an anti-tank rifle, the bullet would pass through one side and out the other, potentially hitting multiple soldiers on the way. This is why they called it the Sardinenbuchse, the sardine can, or worse, the Massengrab, the mass grave. Despite its flaws, the Sd.Kfz 250 was produced in huge numbers. Over 6,000 units were built during the war. It was used on every front, from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen steppes of Russia. It was assigned to the most elite units of the German army, Panzergrenadier divisions.
Reconnaissance battalions. Even the Waffen-SS used it extensively. The irony is bitter. The best trained, most motivated soldiers of the Reich were being transported in one of the most vulnerable vehicles on the battlefield. The vehicle came in many variants. There were versions with heavy machine guns, versions with mortars, versions equipped with anti-tank rockets, and even command versions with extra radios. But the basic problem remained the same across all of them. The crew was exposed, the armor was inadequate, and in a war that increasingly favored the defense, where machine guns and artillery dominated the battlefield, the Sd.Kfz 250 became a liability. There are countless accounts from the Eastern Front that illustrate the horror. Soviet infantry quickly learned that the half-tracks were easy targets. A well-placed burst from a PTRS anti-tank rifle could disable the engine and trap the crew inside. Then, the Soviets would simply wait and pick off the Germans as they tried to escape. In winter, the situation was even worse. The cold made the thin armor brittle. Frostbitten soldiers, crammed into the open compartment, had no protection from the wind.
Many froze to death before they even reached the front line. The psychological effect on the crews was significant. Riding into battle in a vehicle you know cannot protect you is a special kind of terror. Veterans described the feeling of helplessness, of knowing that their fate depended entirely on luck. If the enemy had a machine gun, you prayed they were aiming at someone else. If artillery started falling, you prayed the shells landed far away. There was no skill involved, no tactic that could save you, just hope. Some crews tried to improvise additional protection. They would weld extra steel plates onto the sides. They would stack sandbags on the floor to absorb mine blasts. They would hang spare track links on the hull, hoping they would catch bullets. These modifications helped a little, but they also added weight, slowing the vehicle down and straining the engine. The High Command generally disapproved of such modifications, arguing that they ruined the vehicle's performance. But the men in the field didn't care about performance. They cared about survival. The Sd.Kfz 250 also had a problem with mobility in certain conditions. While it was designed for off-road use, the half-track system was complex and prone to breakdowns. The front wheels were vulnerable to damage. If a wheel was shot out or hit a mine, steering became almost impossible. The tracks themselves required constant maintenance. In the mud of the Russian autumn, known as the Rasputitsa, even half-tracks would get stuck. And a stuck half-track full of soldiers was a perfect target for Soviet artillery. By the middle of the war, German commanders began to realize the limitations of their light half-tracks. They started using the Sd.Kfz 250 more cautiously, keeping it behind the front lines for reconnaissance and communication duties rather than direct assault. But the damage was already done. Thousands of soldiers had died in these vehicles, killed not by enemy tanks, but by rifle fire and shrapnel that the thin armor could not stop. The legacy of the Sd.Kfz 250 is complicated. On one hand, it represented a genuine innovation in military thinking. The concept of mechanized infantry, troops that could keep pace with tanks and fight from their vehicles, would become standard in all modern armies. The American M3 half-track, the Soviet BTR series, and modern infantry fighting vehicles all owe something to the ideas pioneered by vehicles like the Sd.Kfz 250. On the other hand, the execution was flawed. The German designers prioritized speed and production simplicity over crew protection. They built a vehicle that looked good on paper, but failed in the brutal reality of industrialized warfare. After the war, captured Sd.Kfz 250s were studied by Allied engineers. They noted the clever mechanical design, the efficient use of space, and the versatility of the platform. But they also noted the obvious weakness of the armor. The lesson was clear. In future wars, infantry carriers would need to protect their occupants, not just transport them. The age of the open-topped half-track was over. Today, a few Sd.Kfz 250s survive in museums around the world. They look almost quaint, these small angular vehicles from another era. Visitors walk past them without much thought, their attention drawn to the massive tanks nearby. But for the men who rode in them, who watched their comrades die beside them in those cramped compartments, the Sd.Kfz 250 was no museum piece. It was a death trap, a mass grave on tracks, a symbol of a war that consumed men by the millions, often in machines that were never designed to keep them alive. The story of the Sd.Kfz 250 is a reminder that war is not just about the famous weapons. It is about the forgotten ones, too. The vehicles that carried men to their deaths, not in glorious tank battles, but in anonymous ambushes on dusty roads. The next time you see a picture of a German half-track, remember the soldiers inside. Remember that for them, that thin steel box was not a chariot of conquest. It was a coffin.